Matthew Hayes stood outside the bustling dealership that bore his name, Everdrive Auto Group, Midtown Branch. The bold red and black logo above the glass entrance gleamed under the afternoon sun, but Matthew felt no pride in it today. This location, one of 6 he owned, had once been the crown jewel of his father's legacy. Yet over the past 6 months, troubling patterns had emerged. Customer complaints piling up about misleading sales tactics, cold service, and poor management. Despite Rick, the regional manager, repeatedly assuring him everything was under control, something in Matthew's gut told him otherwise. The numbers looked stable on paper, but the human stories, those hidden between spreadsheets and polished reports, felt fractured. He needed answers, real ones. Dressed in a faded flannel shirt, worn jeans, and a fraying baseball cap, Matthew barely resembled the polished CEO, known for sharp suits and confident boardroom presence. A beard grown out over the past week helped complete the disguise, making him appear more like a blue-collar tradesman than a multi-million-dollar business owner. This wasn't a PR stunt. It wasn't about drama or catching someone in the act for a viral video. For Matthew, this was personal. His father had spent 3 decades building Everdrive with integrity, and if that legacy was being quietly dismantled, Matthew needed to see it with his own eyes, without the filter of titles, meetings, or fear-based performances. The minute he stepped inside, the difference was palpable. The familiar smell of leather and coffee lingered in the air, but the vibe felt off. No one greeted him at the door. A receptionist glanced up, offered a mechanical smile, and returned to her screen. The floor was full, customers, browsing SUVs, chatting with sales reps, examining price sheets, but the energy felt transactional, not welcoming. He moved slowly, taking it all in. If any of the employees recognized him, they gave no indication that was good. In all his years of ownership, Matthew had intentionally stayed behind the scenes, empowering managers to lead. It was a hands-off approach he was beginning to regret. As he drifted toward the truck section, a salesman with slicked-back hair and polished shoes spotted him. "Hey there, looking for something reliable today?" the man asked with a rehearsed grin. His name tag read, Chad. Matthew nodded casually, just browsing. "Thinking about upgrading my pickup, something solid." Dependable, Chad's eyes lit up instantly. "You came to the right place, my friend. We've got a few with brand new engines, top-of-the-line stuff. One of them might be perfect for you." Matthew's stomach clenched. The words were said too smoothly, too confidently. Something felt rehearsed. He said nothing, just nodded again, playing the part of the indecisive shopper. He wandered from one truck to the next, letting Chad do the talking. The salesman was smooth, too smooth. He spoke with certainty, pitching features that sounded exaggerated, even misleading. But Matthew didn't challenge him, not yet. He needed to see how far this act would go. How much was performance and how much was policy? At one point, Chad gestured toward a black Silverado, boasting, "This one brand new engine just dropped in last week. Runs like a dream." Matthew knew that truck. It hadn't been touched in over 6 months, other than a basic oil change. That statement wasn't just a stretch, it was a lie. Before Matthew could respond, another voice interjected, "That's not accurate." He turned to see a younger woman in a dealership polo, her expression tense but resolute. Her name tag read, Brooke. Chad glared at her instantly, brushing her off with a dismissive laugh. "Relax, Brooke. Let the man shop." But Matthew took note, that single moment. One employee standing up while another tried to silence her told him everything. This wasn't just about one salesman pushing boundaries. There was a deeper culture issue here, and Matthew had just scratched the surface. He'd come looking for answers, and now he knew he was in the right place. Matthew followed Chad across the polished showroom floor, the salesman gesturing enthusiastically as he led him to a sleek black Silverado parked near the service bay. "This one," Chad said with a flourish, patting the hood, like it was an old friend just had a brand new engine installed last week. "Thing runs like a dream, clean power, smooth ride, and a ton of torque. Honestly, you'd be lucky to find a better deal." He said it with such confidence, such ease, that for a brief moment Matthew wondered if maybe he had the wrong truck. But no, he knew this vehicle. It had been sitting on the lot for months untouched, except for a routine oil change and a tire rotation. There was no new engine, no major service, just a sales pitch and a bold, unapologetic lie. Matthew forced a smile and nodded slowly, pretending to inspect the truck's interior. "Sounds impressive," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "What kind of warranty comes with it?" Without missing a beat, Chad replied, "Full coverage for a year, bumper to bumper, no extra cost, parts, labor, the whole deal. It's part of a new promotion we're running." Matthew's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his expression composed. That was lie. Number 2. The real policy was 30 days standard, limited coverage with multiple conditions. No such promotion had ever been approved or circulated by headquarters. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Chad wasn't bending the truth. He was snapping it in half. Matthew felt a mix of anger and disappointment swelling in his chest, but he said nothing. He needed to see what else Chad would say. Would he double down, keep piling on the fabrications to close the deal, or was this just his default sales script? Either way, it was clear now that something was fundamentally broken in the way this branch operated. And Matthew, though seething inside, was determined to see the rot before he cut it out. "That's generous," he said casually. "Most dealerships barely give you 90 days, Chad chuckled. "Yeah, well, Everdrive takes care of its customers. We go the extra mile." Matthew clenched his fists in his pockets. Before he could push further, a voice cut in calm but firm. "That's not accurate." Matthew turned to see a young woman with auburn hair pulled into a ponytail wearing the dealership's standard navy polo. Her name tag read, Brooke. She stood with her arms crossed, her brows slightly furrowed. "That engine hasn't been replaced. We did a basic tune-up. Oil filters fluids. That's it." For a moment, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Chad's smile faltered, then twisted into something more irritated Brooke. He said, his tone sharp, "Why don't you go check inventory or file those service reports? I've got this covered." Brooke didn't back down, but she did take a step back, her expression stiff. She looked at Matthew, then back at Chad, shaking her head before quietly walking away toward the reception desk. Matthew watched her go, silently impressed. It took guts to speak up like that, especially in a sales environment where commissions were king and silence was safer than honesty. Her interruption hadn't just revealed the truth about the truck, it had exposed a deeper truth about the culture here. A place where speaking up meant getting shut down. A place where the loudest voices got the final word, even when they were wrong. Chad, now slightly flushed, turned back to Matthew, trying to recover the sale. "Don't mind her," he said, with a dismissive chuckle. "She's new, still learning the ropes." But Matthew wasn't listening anymore. He wasn't here to buy a truck. He was here to measure the integrity of his team. And so far, it was looking dangerously thin. 2 blatant lies, a cover-up, and a young employee humiliated for telling the truth. That was more than enough for Matthew to start forming conclusions, but he wouldn't act just yet. He needed more lies, more reactions, more signals of who stood for what, because the dealership that bore his family name was on the line. And today the truth had started to reveal itself, one lie at a time. Chad led Matthew toward one of the smaller sales offices nestled between the showroom and the finance department. The walls were lined with stock photos of muscle cars and motivational quotes about performance speed and success. As they stepped inside, Chad shut the door behind them and pulled out a thick stack of paperwork with the practice speed of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Now," he said, flipping through the pages, "if we can get this signed today, I can probably knock a couple hundred off the price, but only if you're ready to commit right now. Got another buyer interested in this exact truck." Matthew raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The urgency in Chad's tone was all too familiar. pressure tactics designed to corner the buyer into acting fast before they had time to think. It was classic manipulation, and Matthew had seen it used on customers far too often from a distance, but now, sitting in the customer's chair, it felt even worse. Chad leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was letting Matthew in on a secret. Look, man, I don't do this for everyone, okay? But you seem like a straight shooter. You're not going to find a better deal in town. We'll throw in the floor mats. The first oil change, just sign here today. He slid the pen across the table with a wide grin, waiting for the signature. For a moment, Matthew let the silence hang. He looked down at the contract, flipping a few pages, pretending to scan the fine print. He could feel his pulse steadying, his frustration cooling into something sharper clarity. This wasn't just about one lie anymore. This was the process. This was the system. And Chad, confident and smiling, was the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong. Matthew set the pen down carefully, leaned back in his chair, and met Chad's eyes. I think I've seen enough, Matthew said calmly. Chad's smile faltered for the first time. What do you mean? Matthew reached up, pulled off his cap, then slipped off the glasses. He ran a hand through his hair, letting the tension drop from his shoulders as he looked Chad dead in the eye. I own this dealership, he said, his tone still even. My name is Matthew Hayes, and you've lied to me multiple times in less than 15 minutes. Chad's expression collapsed into disbelief. He blinked, then forced a nervous chuckle. Wait, what? But there was no mistaking the change. The friendly customer he thought he was selling to was now the man who signed his paychecks and who had just caught him red-handed. Matthew stood up slowly, his voice gaining weight. You told me this truck had a new engine. It doesn't. You promised a full-year warranty, when the actual policy is 30 days. You tried to rush me into signing without giving me time to think. And when someone tried to tell the truth, you shut her down in front of a customer. Chad stood frozen pale now, his cocky posture replaced with rigid uncertainty. Look, it's just how the game works, he muttered. Customers haggle, they waste our time. We've got quotas. But Matthew wasn't having it. No, that's not the game we play at Everdrive. Not under my name. He stepped toward the door and flung it open. Get Rick. Now the shift in the showroom was immediate. Chad hesitated for a second, then darted off to find the branch manager. Matthew stayed in the doorway watching the team like a general taking stock of his army. A few employees looked over. Curious, Brooke was back at the reception desk, typing something with tight shoulders. The older salesman in the corner was still laughing with a couple clearly oblivious. And Rick, the manager, was seated in his glass-walled office, scrolling through his phone like nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. When Chad whispered in his ear, Rick looked up sharply. A second later, he stood, straightened his blazer, and walked briskly across the floor, forcing a smile. As soon as Rick entered the office, Matthew shut the door behind him. I wasn't expecting you today, mister. Hayes, Rick said, trying to play it cool. Clearly. Matthew replied, because if you had been doing your job, I wouldn't need to be here. He pointed at the still shocked Chad. Your top salesman just lied to me. He tried to pressure me into a sale with false claims and misrepresented warranties. And you were over there checking your phone. Rick opened his mouth, but Matthew cut him off. Save it. This isn't about damage control. This is about responsibility. And right now I'm seeing none. Rick's polished demeanor began to crack. Look, we coach the team on tactics that work. They know how to close deals. If something was said that shouldn't have been, stop. Matthew interrupted. This wasn't a slip. This was procedure. I've heard enough. I want an explanation. I want to know if this is how you've been running my store, and I want to know why people like Brooke, who had the guts to tell the truth, are being silenced instead of supported. The silence in the room was thick. Rick looked from Chad to Matthew, then down at the floor. He didn't have answers, and that Matthew realized was the problem. Leadership had become nothing more than oversight on autopilot. It was time to take the wheel back. Chad stood stiffly in the small office, his hands fidgeting with the edges of the desk as the weight of Matthew's gaze bore down on him. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Look, it's just sales talk. All right?" His voice cracked slightly, the confidence from earlier now replaced by defensiveness. "Everyone does it. You highlight the positives. You give them a reason to buy. That's how we hit our numbers." He looked to Rick, hoping for backup. "You know what I mean, right?" Rick shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Matthew didn't break eye contact. "No," he said, voice low but unmistakably firm. "That wasn't sales talk. That was a lie. Multiple lies. You knowingly misled a customer about the condition of the vehicle and the warranty. That's not persuasion, Chad. That's fraud. And if you can't tell the difference, then you shouldn't be anywhere near a customer." Chad's mouth opened, then shut again. The words were gone. The charm, the smooth delivery, it had all drained from him. He glanced at Rick again, but this time Rick looked just as nervous. Matthew turned his attention to the manager. "And you? How often does this happen?" Rick hesitated. I trust my team to make good decisions. If there have been some oversteps, I'll address them." Matthew leaned forward slightly. "Oversteps? Rick, you weren't even paying attention. You were scrolling your phone while your lead salesman lied to a customer's face. That's not just an overstep, that's negligence." Rick tried to maintain composure. "Mr. Hayes, we're under pressure. Targets are tight. Sometimes the team—" Matthew held up a hand, cutting him off. Don't justify it. This isn't about pressure. This is about principle." The tension in the room was thick. Rick looked increasingly like a man who had lost control of his ship, and Chad had already sunk with it. "I've built this company to stand for something," Matthew said, pacing now. "My father spent 30 years turning Everdrive into a name people could trust, and I'll be damned if I let shortcuts and sales games unravel." That he stopped in front of Chad. "You silenced an employee who tried to tell the truth. You pushed for a sale with false information, and you acted like it was just business as usual." Chad looked at the floor, his voice barely audible. "It is business as usual. Everyone bends the truth a little to close. That was the final straw. Then, everyone is going to have to change, starting today." Matthew exhaled, stepped back and addressed both of them. "Chad, as of now, you're suspended. Clean out your station. I don't know if there's a future for you at Everdrive, but I'm not making that decision today. Right now, I just know that this behavior has no place here." Chad didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, pale and shaken, and walked out without a word. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving only Rick and Matthew in the office. Rick shifted in his chair, trying to compose a defense, but Matthew wasn't interested. "Rick, I trusted you to run this store with integrity. I gave you freedom, autonomy, and this is what came of it. So here's what happens next." Matthew pointed to the desk. "By tomorrow morning, I want a full action plan on my desk, not just words. I want hard numbers. How many complaints, how many questionable deals, how you're going to fix them, and I want it thorough. Every single deal from the last 6 months needs to be reviewed. If I find out there's been a pattern of dishonesty, we make it right with those customers. Refunds, repairs, apologies, whatever it takes." Rick swallowed, clearly, rattled, understood. He said quietly, but Matthew didn't stop. "That's not all I want. Employee feedback. Anonymous. Honest. I want to know who here is part of the problem and who, like Brooke, is trying to do the right thing. Because moving forward, those people are the ones I'm going to build this place around." Rick nodded again, more reluctantly this time. He looked exhausted, like a man who suddenly realized how much work he had ignored for too long. And Rick Matthew added as he stepped toward the door, "If that action plan isn't on my desk by 9 a.m. sharp, you and I are going to have a very different kind of meeting, one that might not end with you still managing this store." He opened the door, pausing just before stepping out. "I came here looking for the truth, and I found it. But from this point on, the lies stop, or I'll shut this whole place down and rebuild it from scratch." With that, he stepped out into the hallway, leaving Rick in stunned silence and the real work just beginning. Matthew stepped out of the office, the tension of the confrontation still clinging to the air. Around him, the showroom buzzed with quiet confusion, employees whispering, customers glancing around, sensing a shift without fully understanding it. But Matthew's focus was locked on one person, Brooke. She was back at the front desk, typing diligently, her face unreadable, but her posture tense. She hadn't looked over during the entire exchange. She didn't need to. She had already done the hard part, spoken up when no one else would. Matthew crossed the room slowly and stopped in front of her. "Brooke," he said gently. She looked up, startled but composed. "Yes, sir." He motioned toward the hallway behind him. "Come with me, please. I'd like a word in private." They walked together in silence to a quieter office at the end of the hall, one usually reserved for visiting district managers. Matthew opened the door, waited for her to enter, and closed it behind them. The room felt cooler, calmer, neutral ground. Brooke sat down, folding her hands in her lap, her eyes flickering with both worry and curiosity. Matthew didn't sit right away. He studied her for a moment, his voice soft but direct. "Why did you speak up earlier?" he asked. The question wasn't accusatory. It was sincere. Brooke blinked, as if surprised he even had to ask. "Because it was wrong," she said plainly. "He lied, and I couldn't stand there and let it happen in front of a customer. Not again." That last phrase, "not again," hung in the air. Matthew finally took the seat across from her, leaning forward. "How often does this happen?" he asked. Brooke looked down for a moment, then answered carefully. "A lot more than you'd think, especially when it's busy. Chad wasn't the only one. It's kind of expected. Not officially, but everyone knows what matters here. Numbers, volume, closing the deal." She paused, her voice lower. "Now I've seen salespeople stretch the truth, skip over fine print, promise things they know aren't in the policy. And if a customer comes back angry, management smooths it over, offer a free oil change, knock off a fee, anything to keep them quiet." Matthew felt his stomach tighten. It was worse than he'd imagined. Not just individual deception, but a culture that enabled and concealed it. He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "Why didn't you report it?" Brooke hesitated. "I thought about it more than once. But what would I say? That I overheard someone promising something that wasn't in writing? There's no proof, and no one really listens. And to be honest," she looked him in the eye, "I didn't think anyone cared. Not really. As long as the sales numbers looked good, it felt like no one wanted to know how they were getting there." Matthew didn't respond right away. He just sat with that truth, letting it settle. Brooke wasn't just describing Chad's behavior. She was exposing the rot that had quietly taken hold under layers of profit reports and polished showroom floors. And yet, despite that environment, she had spoken up. That mattered. You cared. Matthew finally said, when no one else did, "And that tells me something about who you are." Brooke looked uncertain, not used to praise, especially from the man who owned the company. Matthew leaned back slightly. "I need people like you, Brooke. People who actually believe in doing things the right way. Because what I saw today, what I've allowed to happen, that's not the business I want to run. I'm making changes, but I can't do it alone. I need help. I need someone here who understands what integrity really means and isn't afraid to speak up." Brooke's eyes widened slightly. "What are you saying?" she asked. Matthew met her gaze. "I'm asking you to help me rebuild this place, not just from the top down, but from the inside out." Brooke didn't respond right away. She looked down, thinking carefully, then slowly nodded. "I want to help," she said. "But some of the others, they've been working this way for years. I don't know if they'll change." Matthew nodded in return. "Then we find out who's willing to change and who's not. Those who can't adapt to an honest culture won't have a future at Everdrive, but the ones who want to do things right will back them every step of the way." He stood and extended a hand. "You in?" Brooke stood too hesitated just a moment longer, then shook his hand with quiet conviction. "I'm in." As they stepped back into the hallway together, Matthew knew this moment would be a turning point, not just for the dealership, but for the entire culture he was about to transform. The office felt different now, not because the furniture had changed or the lighting had shifted, but because something deeper had begun to stir. Matthew sat at the edge of the desk, arms folded, listening intently as Brooke laid out her thoughts. Her voice was calm but resolute, no longer uncertain, no longer hesitating. If we want this to work, she began, we need to change how we talk to customers. No more pressure, no more tricks, just clear, honest conversations. Explain the real warranty. Show the full inspection reports. Give them the facts and let them decide. She paused, watching for Matthew's reaction. It sounds simple, she added, but around here that would be a big shift. Matthew nodded slowly, turning her words over in his mind. For years, the dealership had run on urgency. Urgency to hit quotas, close deals, move product. That urgency had birthed manipulation, half-truths and sales reps trained to steer conversations instead of listen. Brooke's idea wasn't revolutionary in theory, but it was radical in context. It wasn't just about retraining scripts or rewriting manuals. It was about rewiring the culture. I agree, Matthew said at last. No more grey areas. No more bending the truth to get signatures. We're going to become a place where the truth is the standard, not the exception. He paused, then added, but you know this isn't going to be easy. Brooke gave a faint nod. Some people won't like it, she said. They've spent years learning how to sell a certain way. Fast, aggressive, and always with a shortcut ready. If you take that away, she trailed off, then continued, they're either going to have to relearn everything or they'll push back. Hard Matthew appreciated the honesty. He'd been thinking the same thing. Some employees wouldn't adapt, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. And that was the part that would hurt. Then we'll find out who they are, he said simply, and we'll let them go. It wasn't said with anger. There was no threat in his tone, just a quiet conviction. Matthew wasn't looking for revenge or control. He was looking for alignment. If someone couldn't sell with integrity, they didn't belong at Everdrive, period. From this point on, he said no one gets punished for being honest, and no one gets rewarded for deception. He walked slowly to the window overlooking the showroom. Employees moved in and out of view, some busy with customers, others watching warily, unsure of what would come next. This isn't just about fixing what's broken, he said. It's about building something better, something we can all stand behind. He turned back to Brooke. People like you? People who speak up, even when it's hard. You're going to lead this change. Not because I say so, but because that's who you already are. She blinked clearly, taken aback by the trust he was placing in her. What do you want me to do? She asked softly. Start small, Matthew said. When you see something dishonest, say something. When a co-worker hesitates to tell the truth, back them up. And if management ever tries to silence you again, you come straight to me. Brooke nodded slowly, a new sense of purpose settling into her shoulders. All right, she said. I'll do my best. Matthew smiled faintly. That's all I ask. As she left the office, Matthew remained standing at the window. For the first time that day, he felt something besides frustration and disappointment. He felt momentum. Change was coming not from a memo or a meeting, but from a single voice that had chosen honesty over silence, and now that voice would echo across every deal, every customer interaction, every training session. It wouldn't be instant, there would be resistance. But the line had been drawn, and those who stood on the right side of it would have his full support. Brooke was just the beginning. This dealership was about to become a place where truth didn't just survive, it led. The atmosphere inside the showroom had shifted. Whispers traveled across the floor like an invisible thread connecting each employee in nervous curiosity. They all knew something had happened. Some had seen Chad's face as he left the building. Others had overheard pieces of the confrontation in Rick's office. But now, as Matthew stepped into the center of the dealership floor, the energy changed entirely. His presence wasn't just noticed, it commanded attention. Conversations died. Phones were set down. The technicians in the back even peeked through the glass door. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight in the room spoke for him. I know many of you are wondering why I'm here. Matthew began, his voice calm but clear. And by now, most of you have guessed I didn't just drop in to shake hands and check inventory. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I came because I had concerns, serious concerns about the way this dealership has been operating. And today, those concerns were confirmed. Some employees looked away, others froze. Matthew's eyes moved deliberately across the room, catching glances, meeting gazes showing no anger but absolute certainty. From this moment forward, he continued deceitful sales tactics, misleading warranties and pressure-based selling are over. Effective immediately. He let the words settle like a gavel hitting the bench. We are not going to operate in the grey anymore. We are not going to tolerate half-truths, hidden fees, or convenient miscommunications. If a vehicle has problems, we disclose them. If a warranty is limited, we say so. If a customer needs time to think, we give them that time. A murmur moved through the group. Some faces looked stunned. Others nodded slowly, with something like relief, softening their expressions. But a few remained tense, arms crossed, jaws clenched. Matthew saw it all, and that was exactly why this meeting mattered. To make sure we don't just say we're changing, but actually do it, we'll be conducting a full audit of every deal closed over the last 6 months. He said if we find dishonesty, we'll fix it. That means refund service credits or whatever it takes to make things right with our customers. He didn't sugarcoat it. He wasn't asking for permission. In addition, he said every single employee will complete a new training program focused entirely on ethical selling practices. This training is not optional. If you refuse, you will no longer work here. That's the line, and I'm drawing it clearly. The reaction across the floor was mixed, just as Matthew had expected. A few employees exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered to each other, already calculating the consequences. One younger salesman, who'd only been with the company a few months, looked visibly relieved, like someone had just removed a weight he didn't know he was carrying. Others, long-time staff who had grown comfortable with shortcuts, looked skeptical. Even annoyed, Matthew didn't flinch. He knew this would be hard. Change always brought friction, but friction meant movement. And for the first time in a long while, the dealership was finally moving in the right direction. I'm not doing this to punish anyone. He finished. I'm doing this because our reputation, my father's legacy, my name is tied to the way we treat people. We're not going to be known as the place that tricks customers into deals they don't understand. We're going to be the place they trust. That means some of you will have to relearn everything. Some of you may not like that, and some of you will rise because this kind of culture is what you've been waiting for. He scanned the room one last time. Starting today, honesty isn't optional, it's the standard. Get back to work and do it the right way. Then he stepped aside, watching the crowd as it slowly dispersed, some unsure, some inspired, all aware that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, the dealership was quiet, too quiet. The usual chatter between sales staff was replaced with hushed conversations, glances exchanged in doorways and keyboards, clicking in the finance office with unusual urgency. In the manager's office, Rick sat at his desk with a half-empty cup of coffee, dark circles under his eyes, betraying the night he hadn't slept. In front of him was a thick stack of customer files, contracts from the last 6 months, just as Matthew had ordered. He rubbed his temples, staring at a sales sheet that made his stomach twist. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't tell the truth either. The inspection checkboxes were all ticked, but no inspection report was attached. The sales rep had written certified pre-owned, but the car had never gone through certification. It was the third file that morning with similar discrepancies. Matthew stepped into the office without knocking. Rick quickly stood, stiffening. "Morning, sir," he said, voice taut. Matthew nodded and motioned for him to sit. "What have you found?" he asked. Rick hesitated, then opened a folder, sliding it across the desk. "This customer." He said tapping the form was told they were getting a fully inspected used SUV, but according to the service log, it never even went through diagnostics. They paid for a certification package that doesn't exist on file. Matthew didn't say a word. He flipped to the next file, and this one he asked warranty misrepresentation. Rick admitted. Said it was 12 months, bumper to bumper. Actual policy is 30 days, parts only. Matthew's jaw clenched slightly. How many more of these are there? He asked. Rick looked down a lot. Matthew leaned forward slowly, folding his arms across the desk. Then here's what we're going to do, he said. We're going to contact every single customer who was misled, every one of them. We're going to offer full refunds where necessary, service plans where needed, and handwritten apologies where appropriate. No exceptions. We fix this period. Rick blinked, stunned. That's going to cost us. Not as much as letting it go, Matthew interrupted. The cost of silence. Rick is trust. And once we lose that, it's not coming back. He let the words hang. This isn't damage control. This is integrity. Control, and we do it, not because we have to, but because it's right. Rick nodded slowly but uneasily. Matthew could see the wheels turning in his mind, calculating, balancing risk, trying to protect the business he'd been trusted to run. But it wasn't just about spreadsheets anymore. It was about leadership, about values, about who Rick really was beneath the blazer and title. Matthew stood and stepped around the desk, standing just beside him now, not as a boss, but as a man staring into another man's conscience. Let me ask you something, Matthew said quietly. Are you doing this because you believe in it, or because you're afraid of losing your job? Rick didn't answer at first. He looked away, then back. Honestly, he said. Both Matthew respected the honesty. He gave a slight nod. That's fair, he said, but fear's not going to get you through this. If you want to stay in this seat, I need more than compliance. I need commitment. I need a leader who believes in what we're doing, not someone who's just trying to stay off my radar. Rick straightened slightly, the tension in his face beginning to shift. I want to believe in it, he said. I do. I've been doing this a long time, and I've never seen it work this way. Telling the whole truth, letting customers walk away without pushing. Matthew raised an eyebrow. Then maybe we'll be the first to prove it. Can? He clapped a hand gently on Rick's shoulder. This isn't about the past. It's about what we choose from this point forward. As Matthew left the office, he passed a couple of team members gathering by the reception desk. They stiffened as he walked by, then quickly turned back to their tasks. He didn't stop them. He didn't need to change, had already started, but the real test was coming. Whether the people who'd once thrived in the old system could adapt to something more honest, more sustainable. Back in his own office, Matthew sat down and opened his laptop, drafting the first version of a customer outreach letter. It wouldn't be generic. It would be human, humble, accountable. Because if they were going to rebuild trust, it had to start with a voice that was willing to say what few companies ever did. We were wrong, and we're making it right. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the line of trees outside the dealership, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Most of the day's tension had started to settle like dust after a storm, but one person hadn't left yet. Chad stood outside by his car, arms crossed, jaw tight, as if waiting for something or someone. When Matthew spotted him through the window, he didn't hesitate. He walked out slowly, the door swinging shut behind him with a quiet finality. Chad turned when he heard the footsteps, his posture guarded but no longer arrogant. Didn't think you'd come out, he said. His voice wasn't hostile, just tired. Thought you were too busy cleaning house. Matthew stopped a few feet away, giving Chad space. I figured you'd be gone by now, he replied. Packing up, moving on. Chad let out a short breath that could have been a laugh or a sigh. I was. But then I figured, maybe we should clear the air. He kicked a small stone near his shoe and looked down. Look, I know I screwed up, but I'm not going to stand here and pretend I suddenly believe in this new honesty-first plan you're rolling out. He glanced up. You really think customers want that? The truth, they want to feel like they're getting a deal, even if it's smoke and mirrors. They don't want details. They want dopamine. That's what sells cars. Matthew didn't flinch. You might be right, he said calmly. Some customers want that feeling. Some want to believe in the fantasy. but that doesn't make it right. It just makes it easy. And easy isn't how we're doing things anymore. He stepped a little closer, voice unwavering. You had the chance to change, Chad, to be part of this shift, but from the way you talk, it sounds like you've already made your decision. Chad shrugged, his arms still crossed. Yeah, I guess I have. He looked out toward the road. There are other dealerships that still do it the old way. They'll take me, I'll be fine. Matthew nodded. I'm sure they will. But just know when that system eventually breaks, and you'll have been part of why Chad didn't respond right away. He just stared out at the horizon, jaw tense, processing the weight of that truth. You don't get it, he finally muttered. I've been doing this for over a decade. I know how to move numbers, this whole thing you're building. It's noble, sure, but it's going to tank your bottom line. Matthew exhaled. Then let it. I'd rather lose short-term profit than build a business on deception, because at the end of the day, I have to look in the mirror and know I didn't lie to anyone to get ahead. That means more to me than a quarterly bonus. Chad was silent for a moment. Then, without another word, he opened his car door and slid inside. He didn't slam it. He didn't offer a final retort. He just sat there for a beat, hands gripping the wheel before starting the engine and pulling out of the lot. As he drove away, Matthew remained standing on the curb, watching the car shrink in the distance. It wasn't satisfaction. He felt it was resolution. Some people wouldn't come along for the journey. Some weren't meant to. And that was okay. Not everyone was built for reinvention. Some were too tied to the old ways, too comfortable in the game they'd mastered. But this wasn't about them anymore. Inside the dealership, behind the tinted front windows, Brooke stood quietly near the reception desk. She had seen the entire exchange unfold from a distance. She didn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She could tell from the way Chad's shoulders slumped and Matthew stood firm that the chapter had closed. As Chad's taillights disappeared down the street, she took a deep breath and turned back to her monitor. There was work to do, calls to make, customers to follow up with. But this moment, this quiet confirmation meant more than all of it. Change had arrived. It wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real, and Brooke understood now more than ever that this place would never go back to what it was. The future had begun, and it started with truth. As the late afternoon sun filtered through the wide showroom windows, Matthew found himself exactly where he hadn't stood in years on the sales floor, but this time he wasn't there as the distant owner whose name was printed on every sign and document. He was there as a listener, an observer, a reformer. The whirlwind of confrontations and decisions from earlier in the day had started to settle, but what remained was a quiet tension in the air, uncertainty wrapped in cautious hope. Matthew walked slowly past the polished SUVs, sedans, and trucks, hands clasped behind his back, stopping here and there just to listen. No clipboard, no title badge, just presence. And that presence was already changing the way the team moved. Some employees still carried the weight of skepticism in their body language, quick glances toward him, lowered voices, forced smiles. But not all. There was something different about the way Brooke carried herself now. She wasn't trying to hide in the margins. She wasn't biting her tongue. She was standing beside a young couple near the service desk, patiently explaining the difference between two warranty options. No upselling, no jargon, no bait and switch, just facts, just clarity. When the couple looked confused, she took out a printout of the inspection history and walked them through each item. She didn't try to rush them. She didn't tell them what to decide. She gave them space to think, and they thanked her for it, not just with their words, but with the trust in their eyes. Matthew stood at a distance and watched. This was what the new culture looked like in real time, not a memo, not a training video. A single interaction that respected the customer, honored the truth, and set the tone. He realized then that what he was rebuilding wasn't just policy, it was posture. The way his team would carry themselves going forward. Transparent, respectful, grounded in reality. He took a few more slow laps around the floor, stopping to speak briefly with a service technician complimenting the cleanliness of the bay. A receptionist passed him a file and offered a half smile. "Thank you for earlier," she whispered. Things feel different, and they did. Not perfect, but different. By early evening, the fluorescent showroom lights flickered on, and Matthew made his way to the center of the room. Brooke had just finished with another customer and was tidying up a display rack. When she looked up and saw him, she gave a short nod, then walked over. "Busy day?" she said with a tired but genuine smile. Matthew chuckled. You could say that. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the kind that comes when words aren't necessary to mark a moment's wait. "I watched you earlier," Matthew said. "The way you handled that couple. That's the kind of interaction I want this entire dealership built around. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't forceful. It was honest." Brooke's cheeks flushed slightly. "It's just the way I'd want to be treated," she replied. "That's all," he nodded. "Exactly. And that's the bar we're setting." He looked out across the floor where a few remaining employees were wrapping up their day. "It's not going to be easy," he continued. "There will be pushback. There will be days we fall short. But every time we do it right, every time someone like you speaks up or guides a customer with honesty, we take a step in the right direction." Brooke looked around, the weight of the moment beginning to settle in. "You really think we can turn this place around?" she asked. Matthew looked her in the eyes. "We're not just turning it around, we're building it from the ground up, and I want you to be part of that, not just as a voice of reason, but as a leader." The words landed with clarity and purpose. Brooke didn't answer right away. She just nodded slowly, her shoulders lifting with something that felt like pride and responsibility. As the last few employees clocked out and the floor began to empty, Matthew and Brooke remained standing side by side, not as boss and staff, but as partners in a mission to restore what had been lost, to define success not by how quickly cars moved off the lot, but by how confidently customers walked out the door. The journey ahead would be long. It would be hard, but it would be worth it. And as Matthew glanced once more across the quiet dealership, he knew this was just the beginning. A new Everdrive had been born. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect on what true leadership really means, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to Deep Inside HQ for more powerful real-life stories about courage, integrity, and transformation in the workplace. Each video is a window into what happens when people stand up, speak out, and lead with heart. Share this story with someone who believes in doing business the right way, and let's keep building a world where honesty isn't the exception, but the standard. Your voice matters, your values matter, and together we can change the culture one story at a time.